Hi everyone, welcome back. My name is Amy Souza, and some of you may know me as Known Heretic from Twitter. So, this is part two of a two-part episode exploring the relationship between the children's story Brenda is a Sheep and the traditional fairy tale Little Red Riding Hood. So, in the first video, we explored the book Brenda is a Sheep. We read through that book and discussed along the way some of the behaviors of the character Brenda and some of the behaviors of the sheep. Today, I brought with me my favorite complete collection of the Grimm's fairy tales, and I'm going to read to you from that book, the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Then what we're going to get into is we're going to do a little compare and contrast, and we're going to look at the lessons learned by the characters in the Brenda is the Sheep story, and we're going to compare those with the lessons learned by Little Red Riding Hood in the traditional fairy tale. All right, thanks so much, and let's get to it. Really quick little aside. If for some reason you don't want to hear the entire story because you feel like you're so familiar with the Little Red Riding Hood story, skip ahead to minute 10:17. Okay. Okay. Settle in, children. So, in the Grimm's Brothers story, they've titled the story Little Red Cap. So some versions it is called Little Red Cap, and other versions it is called Little Red Riding Hood. So, once upon a time, there was a dear little girl who was loved by everyone who looked at her, but most of all by her grandmother, and there was nothing she would not have given to the child. Once she gave her a little red cap of velvet, which suited her so well that she would never wear anything else. So she was always called Little Red Cap. One day her mother said to her, "Come, Little Red Cap, here is a piece of cake and a bottle of wine. Take them to your grandmother. She is ill and weak, and they will do her good. Set out before it gets hot, and when you are going, walk nicely and quietly and do not run off the path, or you may fall and break the bottle, and then your grandmother will get nothing. And when you go to her room, don't forget to say, 'Good morning,' and don't peep into every corner before you do." "I will take great care," said Little Red Cap to her mother, and gave her hand on it. The grandmother lived in the wood, half a league away from the village, and just as Little Red Cap entered the wood, a wolf met her. Red Cap did not know what a wicked creature he was, and was not afraid of him at all. "Good day, Little Red Cap," he said. "Thank you kindly, Wolf." "Whither away so early, Little Red Cap?" "To my grandmother's." "What have you got in your apron?" "Cake and wine. Yesterday was baking day, so poor sick grandmother is to have something good to make her stronger." "Where does your grandmother live, Little Red Cap?" "A good quarter of the league further on in the wood. Her house stands under a large oak trees. The nut trees are just below. Surely you must know it," replied Little Red Cap. The wolf thought to himself, "What a tender young creature! What a nice, plump, full mouthful! She will be better to eat than the old woman. I must act craftily to catch both." So he walked for a short time on the side of Little Red Cap, and then he said, "See, Little Red Cap, look how pretty the flowers are hereabout. Look how sweetly the birds sing. Why do you not look around? You walk gravely as though you were going to school, while everything else is out and merry in the wood." Little Red Cap raised her eyes, and then she saw the sunbeams dancing here and there through the trees, and the pretty flowers growing everywhere, and she thought, "Suppose I take grandmother a fresh nosegay. That would please her too. It is so early in the day that I shall get there in good time." And so she ran from the path and into the wood to look for flowers. And whenever she had picked one, she fancied that she saw a still prettier one farther on and ran after it. And so she got deeper and deeper into the wood. Meanwhile, the wolf ran straight to the grandmother's house and knocked on the door. "Who is there?" Little Redcap, replied the wolf. She is bringing cake and wine. Open the door. Lifteth the latch, called out the grandmother. I am too weak and I cannot get up. And the wolf lifted the latch and sprang open the door, and without saying a word, he went straight to the grandmother's bed and devoured her. Then he put on her clothes and dressed himself in her cap and laid himself in the bed and drew the curtains. Little Redcap, however, had been running about picking flowers, and she had gathered so many to carry that she could carry no more. And then she remembered her grandmother and set out on the way to her. She was surprised to find the cottage door standing open, and when she went into the room, she had such a strange feeling that she said to herself, "Oh dear, how uneasy I feel today. At other times, I like being with grandmother so much." And she called out, "Good morning," but she received no answer. So she went straight to the bed and drew back the curtains. There lay her grandmother with her cap pulled over her face, looking very strange. "Oh, grandmother," she said, "what big ears you have." "The better to hear you with, my child," was the reply. "But grandmother, what big eyes you have." "The better to see you with, my dear." "But grandmother, what large hands you have." "The better to hug you with." "Ah, but grandmother, what a terrible big mouth you have." "The better to eat you with." And scarcely had the wolf said this than with one bound he was out of bed and swallowed up Little Redcap. When the wolf had appeased his appetite, he lay down again in the bed and fell asleep to snore very loud. The huntsman was just passing the house and thought to himself, "How the old woman is snoring. I must see if she wants anything." So he went into the room, and when he came to the bed, he saw that the wolf was lying in it. "Do I find you here, old sinner?" he said. "I have long sought you." And just as he was going to fire at him, it occurred to him that the wolf might have devoured the grandmother, and that she still might be saved. So he did not fire, but took a pair of scissors and began to cut open the stomach of the sleeping wolf. When he had made 2 snips, he saw Little Redcap shining. And then he made 2 more snips, and the little girl sprang out crying, "Ah, how frightened I have been! How dark it was inside the wolf!" And after that, the aged grandmother came out alive also, but scarcely able to breathe. Redcap, however, quickly fetched great stones which they filled the wolf's belly with, and when he awoke he wanted to run away, but the stones were so heavy that at once he fell dead. All 3 were delighted. The huntsman drew off the wolf's skin and went home with it. The grandmother ate the cake and drank the wine that Little Redcap had brought, and she revived. But Redcap thought to herself, "As long as I live, I will never by myself leave the path to run into the wood when my mother has forbidden me to do so." It is also related that once, when Redcap was again taking her cakes to the old grandmother, another wolf spoke to her and tried to entice her from the path. However, Redcap was on her guard and went straight forward on her way and told her grandmother that she had met a wolf and that he had said good morning to her, but with such wicked look in his eyes that if they had not been on a public road, she was certain he would have eaten her up. "Well," said the grandmother, "we will shut the door, and he may not come in." Soon afterward, the wolf knocked and cried, "Open the door, grandmother. I am Little Redcap, and am bringing you some cakes." But they did not speak or open the door, so the graybeard stole twice and thrice around the house and at last jumped on the roof, intending to wait until Redcap went home in the evening and to steal after her and devour her in the darkness. But the grandmother saw what was in his thoughts. In front of the house was a great stone trough, so she said to the child, "Take a pail, Redcap. I made some sausages yesterday, so carry the water which I boiled them to the trough." Redcap carried until the trough was quite full. The smell of sausages reached the wolf, and he sniffed and peeped down, and at last stretched out his neck so far he could no longer keep his footing, and began to slip, and slipped down from the roof straight into the stone trough, and was drowned. But Redcap went joyously home, and no one ever did anything to harm her again. The end. So, I want to start us out today by reading you a quote, and this quote is by Bruno Bettelheim in a book called The Uses of Enchantment, The Meaning and Importance of Fairy Tales. And in this book, he says, all good fairy tales have meaning on many levels. Only the child can know which meanings are significant to him at the moment. As he grows up, the child discovers new aspects of these well-known tales, and this gives him the conviction that he has indeed matured into understanding, since the same story now reveals so much more to him. Okay, so what Bettelheim is talking about here, and what he talks about really throughout the book, is that fairy tales, because of their richness in images and multiple layers, there are different levels of awareness that those stories are happening on. At the one level, there's, just a pretty lovely story happening. But those images that are at work on the kids are affecting them, not just on the level of the conscious listening of the story, but they're also working on children in an unconscious level. And those images are filled with depth and resonance. And because of their inherent darkness within them, they're triggering awarenesses that the child has in themselves. So these levels of depth, these are working on the level of the intuition. These are working on the level of the imagination, and these are working on the level of instinct. And that's why it's so great that these traditional fairy tales are so multi-layered and complex and full. They're more than two-dimensional, even though it seems like, okay, there's just a few characters. There's just Little Red, there's her grandmother, there's her mom, there's the wolf, there's the woodcutter. But even though it's seemingly simple, it's not shallow, okay? It's not two-dimensional. It's three-dimensional and rich. So it's provoking in the child a lot of questions, and these stories are ultimately meant to provoke because they are activating stories. They are asking kids to get in touch with those parts of themselves, okay? And we're going to get into that. But before we do, I want to go to something that I forgot yesterday, and it's the first part of the Brenda story, and I can't believe I missed this. It went by so quickly, so I just want to jump to it now before we jump into our full compare and contrast. Thanks. So I want to talk about first, really quickly, something that I didn't mention yesterday. I can't believe I didn't catch this yesterday, but it went by so fast in that video version that I didn't catch the picture. But if we look really quickly, one of the very first things that happens, actually the very first thing that happens in the story of Brenda is a Wolf, is that the first game that the wolf likes to play with the sheep is called Catch. But really, the wolf is holding a bow and has shot an arrow at the sheep. So the very first action of the book is the wolf has already tried to kill the sheep. And I think that I'm really sorry that I just, that went by so quickly yesterday, but I'm definitely going to harp on it a lot today. That's literally the first action of that book is the attempted killing of the sheep by the wolf. And so I don't want us to get lost or forget that as we move forward, because I am going to be talking about it. Okay, so just to quickly review from yesterday, let's go over Brenda's predatory wolf behavior in Brenda is a Sheep. So, first, Brenda actually tries to shoot one of the sheep with a bow and arrow that we see. We see Brenda sharpening her teeth. We see Brenda running and trying to catch a sheep. We see Brenda with her cookbook called 101 Sheep Recipes. We see Brenda cooking up a traditional lamb mint sauce. Brenda actually tells the sheep to go to sleep. Brenda refers to sheep as yummy. Brenda admits she had a plan all along, but was simply distracted from fulfilling it. Okay, we're told at the end of the story that things didn't go according to Brenda's plan. Okay, thanks. So, in today's story, we also saw a lot of predatory behavior. Okay, so first we see the wolf in the woods. He sees Little Red and he grins a kind of sinister smile. And the first thing that he does is he advises her to do something against her mother's wishes, which is to go into the woods. He is also predatory when he goes and actually devours the grandmother. He's also predatory when he disguises himself as the grandmother to fool Little Red. He is also predatory when he eats Little Red. And at the little epilogue in the Grimm Brothers story, we also see that there is a second wolf who comes and uses sneaky behavior to try to get into the house and devour those ladies once again. So both stories show a lot of wolves being predatory. Wolves are, in fact, predatory animals. So in many ways, it's not the predatory nature that is or should be very surprising, but we're going to look at how the different characters handle those predatory things. So the lessons of Brenda are still lessons, even though they're bad lessons. And they are to ignore your natural survival instincts, ignore your senses, imitate the predator's behavior as more desirous than your own, placate the predator, ignore lessons of the past, and remain ignorant of all possible future actions. Okay. So first we're going to talk about the lessons learned by the sheep. So while these aren't really, or I'm going to critique these as really dangerous lessons, these are lessons. So if we look at the behavior of the sheep and how they behave towards Brenda and what happens from the beginning to the end of the story, we're going to see a few dangerous things. So in the beginning, the sheep notice that Brenda is throwing arrows at them, shooting arrows at them. One of the sheep, we are shown, has caught one of those arrows in its mouth, okay? The sheep also notice about Brenda that she has really sharp teeth, that she's much bigger than them, and they are seeing her with, she's shown in front of them with a cookbook, and she's making some mint jelly in front of them. So all of these things we're seeing is that these sheep are not trusting their survival instincts. They're not paying attention to their instincts. They're actually ignoring their senses. So they're ignoring we don't know if they have any intuitive sense of what this means, but we do know that they see and name these things and in fact are ignoring them. they are also emulating the predator's behavior as their own, as more desirous as their own. These are sheep. Sheep don't have to have wool sweaters. Sheep have a natural wool sweater. And yet we see all of these sheep sharing themselves, dyeing wool and creating wool sweaters just like the one Brenda has. So they're actually copying the behavior of the predator. Again, this is very dangerous. They placate the predator. That's what we see in the end. Throughout the whole book, Brenda is making a plan to eat sheep. In the end, they throw Brenda a party, and we are told that because of this, she changes her plans. So we're told in this story that in order to not be killed by the predator, you have to placate that predator. You might be able to be nice enough or do something good enough so that they will leave you alone. I mean, this is a terrible lesson. Excuse me. And in fact, these sheep don't learn anything from the past. They don't learn lessons of the past. The wolf attempts to shoot them in the beginning. The wolf chases them in the beginning, but they learn nothing from their past. And this means they remain ignorant of any possible future consequences. So in this story, we learn that we don't learn an X plus Y equals Z, or A plus B equals C. We don't learn that this action plus this action has a consequence. So there's nothing that they really gain except if you want to survive a predator, you must placate them. And that is a really dangerous lesson for these sheep. And it's a really dangerous lesson to be giving to kids. So basically telling kids to all of those things: ignore instincts, ignore senses, ignore your intuition, emulate the predator, placate the predator. And it doesn't give kids any tools for how to handle future scenarios, nor does it give them an idea of your actions will have consequences. So this is ultimately really scary. Okay, so in comparison to the sheep, Little Red actually learns quite a few lessons, and we're going to go over all of them in detail, but I'm going to just read these out with my slide. So she learns to listen to the advice of her mother, could be any parent or guardian. She learns to pay attention to her surroundings. She learns not to trust strangers simply because they're charming. She learns if you are uncomfortable, get an adult to intervene. She learns that overindulgent caregivers can lead to trouble or danger. She learns to pay attention to the traits that people show you. She learns to pay attention to her senses, hearing, seeing, touching, and tasting. She learns to trust her intuition and instincts. She learns from her past mistakes and builds maturity along the way. And she gains the wisdom to imagine the consequences of future actions. So in the beginning of the story, Little Red is given the advice by her mother to stay on the path and not to dally along. Of course, in the beginning of the story, she doesn't listen to this advice, okay? She does ignore this advice. But by the end of the story, we see her recognize this for the truth. At the end of the story, and this is an interesting thing about fables, especially Hans Christian Andersen fables and Grimm fables. One of the wonderful things is that the child voices their own lesson. So if you notice at the end of the story, it's not the mother or the grandmother or the woodcutter who says to Little Red, "Hey, I told you so. You should have stayed on that path." Little Red actually voices for herself, "Next time I am going to stay on the path if my mother has told me to stay on the path." Okay. So she recognizes that that was actually a really good rule that her mother gave her. And she says that next time she's going to pay attention to it. And in fact, in the epilogue, we see that when she is confronted with another wolf, she does stay on the path. And she gets immediately to her grandmother's house in that epilogue and is able to deal with that wolf. She's actually learned a lesson and knows how to do it. Pay attention to your surroundings, okay? So again, this is a lesson learned over time in this story. In the beginning, she is not paying attention to her surroundings. The wolf gives her the suggestion that she should collect some flowers. And we see Little Red going after one flower, finding one deeper into the forest, finding one deeper. She strays off the path. Eventually, she gets back to her grandmother's house. But actually, at this point, we already see that she's starting to get some signals from her body. She notices, we are told, that when she comes to her grandmother's house, she sees the door open and she gets an uneasy feeling, okay? Now, in the first part of the story, she doesn't know what to do with that feeling, but she says to herself, I usually always like visiting my grandmother, but today I don't feel easy about it. So her body is trying to give her information already, but she doesn't know what to do with that information. Again, we see in the epilogue that the next time she meets the wolf, she is able to handle him. She sees his grin and sees that it's devilish and wicked and knows what to do, okay? So in the beginning, she doesn't have enough natural fear to know to be afraid of the wolf. And this, again, this is something that's true of kids. They don't always have enough natural fear to be afraid of the stranger. And this is a lesson that's learned over time. So in the beginning, when she's confronted with the wolf and he gives her these suggestions, she kind of goes along with them. But a really interesting aspect of this story, if we're looking at it at the level of the unconscious, we might just say, that was a really stupid thing of her to give the wolf her grandmother's address. But one of the ways that this story can be read is that unconsciously, she knows she is unprepared to deal with this wolf herself. So she sends him to an adult, okay? And this is a very smart lesson that kids are picking up on an unconscious level. If you don't know how to deal with the stranger, get an adult, okay? So she sends that wolf to her grandmother's house. And she, sends him away from her for her grandmother to deal with. Now, this enacts another problem. Okay, we're told in the story multiple times that the grandmother spoils Little Red. And this is very common for grandparents too. But we're given a key lesson because we see what happens with the overindulgent caregiver, okay? Being an overindulgent caregiver leads to trouble because when the wolf knocks on her door pretending to be Little Red, the grandmother tells her exactly how to get in. The grandmother doesn't stop and listen and hear what that wolf voice is. The grandmother just lets him in. So she gets devoured. And that is the lesson of the overindulgent caregiver. We see that it's not something that you should wish for, but something to actually be wary of. And that's a great lesson in this story. Again, it's not necessarily going to be assimilated by the child on the conscious level, but it's right there in the story. She learns in this story to pay attention to the traits that people show you. Okay. So again, she's learning to pay attention to her body. Just like when Little Red approaches the cabin and feels uneasy about entering, she also notices all the things about the wolf, using her senses, hearing, seeing, touching, tasting. What big ears you have, what big eyes you have, what big hands you have, what big mouth you have. She's paying attention to what's in front of her, even if at this point in the story, she doesn't quite know how to process it. Now, in this story, the grandmother and Little Red face consequences. Both of them are devoured by this wolf. And it tells kids that is what some strangers want to do. It is in the wolf's nature to do this, and he does it. He devours them. But what happens now is the woodcutter comes along and he slits the belly open. The first thing we hear the woodcutter say is that he sees Little Red in light. Okay. Now, again, if we're reading this on a psychological level, that is the light of consciousness. Okay. They have learned a lesson. Little Red has learned a lesson. Everything that was unconscious to her in the past, she has now become conscious of. And again, it's also a great metaphor that she is emerging out of this wolf's belly. It is like a rebirth, okay? This is a rebirth from ignorance into consciousness. And now Little Red has learned that lesson of how to pay attention to her body, how to pay attention to her senses, how to pay attention to her instincts, her survival instincts, and how to pay attention to her intuition. And from this, okay, she builds maturity. She's able to imagine future consequences. So in that epilogue, when she again runs into a whole new wolf on the path, she knows what to do. Okay. She sees his wicked smile. She heads away to the grandmother's house, tells an adult what is going on. The grandmother has also learned her lesson and they prepare. Okay. And very swiftly, they take care of that second wolf. They know just what to do. They know what he's about. They know how to handle the situation. And I said this earlier, but I want to go back to this now because, again, it's vitally important that Little Red voices her lesson herself, okay? It is a morality tale. So in that sense, reading stories like this to kids, are in a sense telling them a lesson, but they see the child within the lesson discovering the lesson for themselves, okay? Again, I said this a little bit earlier, but it's not her mom. It's not the woodcutter. It's not the grandmother who say, I told you so. You should have stayed on the path. She hears that for herself. She says, next time, if my mother tells me, I am going to stay on the path. And this is about understanding that adults have put certain rules in place for your benefit. Okay. And these boundaries that your parents or caregivers or teachers give you are for your safety. Kids need boundaries. Kids need to understand that boundaries are safe for them. Okay. It's incredibly horrifying to teach kids to not pay attention to their own boundaries, to not pay attention to their own embodied responses. And that's very much what the Brenda story does. It's denying kids the opportunity to learn about boundaries. And it's ultimately telling them to placate their abuser, which is, frankly, this is grooming culture. This is grooming kids into a state of unconsciousness. The stories are they're opposite. These stories are so opposite. I'm shocked and amazed that the Brenda story has won awards. I'm baffled. I'm baffled that this is being disseminated to school children. I feel very much that our children are being groomed in plain sight in front of our eyes, rather than being told, hey, it's safe to have boundaries. It's healthy to have boundaries. Understand that there are consequences to your actions. Learn to pay attention to your embodied responses. Learn to pay attention to your intuition, to your instincts. And imagine that there are consequences to the things that you do and the people that you see. So kids, if you see Brenda, it's okay to say and name Brenda is a wolf. Um, One last observation about this book: in the whole entire book, it never says that Brenda is a wolf. It remains adamant um, that Brenda is a sheep. And, I just think it's so harmful to gaslight our kids like this. Brenda's a friggin' wolf. I almost lost it in a swear. Brenda's a friggin' wolf, and that's what you need to know about that. So, thank you guys so much for bearing with me on this entire journey. This video got really long. There was a lot to explore, there was a lot to unpack. So, I appreciate you making it this far. Please follow me on Twitter. Please subscribe to my channel here on YouTube. I hope to be making a lot more consistent videos for you. And I do have in my YouTube a little buy me a coffee. And if you feel like you have extra and you are able, I do so appreciate it. I'm trying to learn a lot more about how to use iMovie and how to do editing and how to make these videos more fun and more accessible for you. My next one, or one that I've been working on for a while now, is going to unpack gender and how gender has basically been erected over the last thousands of years. So I'm going to start way back with Aristotle. We're going to look at how he gendered culture. We're going to move through the Bible. We're going to move through Darwin. We're going to move through a lot of this up to the present day. And I think that will be a couple of videos in a row as well. So anyway, that's it for now. Thank you so much. And do not buy your children Brenda is a Wolf. If you want a wolf story, read the classic, get the Grimm brothers. It's a gorgeous story. All right, have a good night. Bye.